With Yuki debuting as the very first AoE-focused order banner character in Chaos Zero Nightmare, players are understandably curious if she's worth it, how strong she is in practice, how her kit works, and what team setups allow her to shine now that enough time has passed. With this, we'll talk about all of this and more, as Yuki brings solid AoE DPS and is strongest when able to pull her own DPS cards. However, as usual, every character has their strengths and weaknesses, and there's a lot to talk about when it comes to Yuki's. With this all out of the way though, remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed today's video. But before we begin, thanks again to Chaos Zero Nightmare for sponsoring today's video. Without further ado though, let's get into it. Yuki's entire card kit is designed around keeping her rotation smooth, consistent, and constantly fueled by the inspiration effect on her cards. Her ego skill, Skyscraper Cleave, is a strong AoE strike that also acts as a means to move her cards to the top of the draw pile, and this scales said AoE damage in doing so. This shuffling has added benefits though, as sometimes you will otherwise discard valuable DPS cards that you aren't able to use at the end of a turn, so this is actually more impactful in creative ways if you think about it. Cards like Prepare to Subdue and Trickery Strike play a crucial support role in her DPS loop, and Prepare to Subdue specifically gives her an immediate damage boost while guaranteeing that she draws and activates an attack card with Inspiration, and on the other hand, Trickery Strike will force Inspiration activation from random cards in her hand, letting her unlock higher damage, lower card costs, or any of the Inspiration effects locked on her cards. Her main attack cards round out the rest of her kit, with each offering something different depending on the situation, and her first basic card, Longsword Slash, upgrades into a zero-cost inspiration trigger and is honestly one of the more solid basic cards in a kit because of its decent damage and free usage. Her second basic card, Rapid Slash, hits pretty hard thanks to its added bonus effect, but this is at the cost of being a 2 AP card, making it decent but sometimes unusable unless you compare her with a character who can reduce the cost of said card or activate basic cards for free. Flash Slash is one of her more flexible cards as it deals strong AoE damage by default, but this can be modified to hit either much harder, hit several times, cost far less, or even be changed to a single target variation depending on your epiphany path. Iceberg Cleave is another AoE option that hits hard, but notably in this case, the card does have a 20% damage decrease at base, but can also be activated with an inspiration for an additional hit. As a side note, however, this doesn't have an epiphany like other cards, but overall the card's DPS is solid and is one of the more reliable ways to deal AoE damage with Yuki. Freezing Blade adds a passive AoE every time Yuki activates Inspiration, and this is actually one of the more underappreciated but still high contributing damage factors to her total DPS. Now regarding her potential, like most other characters, Yuki's gives her a series of small but meaningful stat increases with a few standout passive upgrades that directly strengthen her kit. The most significant of the breakpoints is Potential 3, which adds inspiration based effects to her basic cards, and this is what adds the instant noticeable value to her rotation by reducing the cost of Longsword Slash and giving Rapid Slash a strong multiplier whenever inspiration is active. Now since there are also often periods where Yuki won't have access to cards like Iceberg Cleave or Flash Slash like at the start of a Chaos run, having improved basic cards is much more important than you'd think. Potentials 5 and 7 build on this foundation with increasing base damage on her important attacks, and 5-1 specifically increases the damage of Longsword Slash and Rapid Slash, while 7-1 enhances Flash Slash and Iceberg Cleave and scales even further if she reaches high attack thresholds. Overall though, despite the conditions for the 5th and 7th potentials, all of her potentials are nice for a DPS character, as they of course are damage increases through one card or another and are relevant if you want to increase your total DPS. Yuki's best performing builds revolve around maximizing her crit scaling and ensuring that her attacks hit as hard as possible, and as a result the most common setup is a 2-2-2 setup using 2-piece Executioner's Tool, 2-piece Blackwing, and these two alone will give her a mix of unconditional crit damage and attack percent that directly scales and benefits every part of her kit. As for her last 2-piece set, this can alternate between the Scarab set for basic card bonuses or the Agony set if you can maintain Agony on the enemy, but you may at this point be wondering why the 4-piece Order set isn't her clear and far ahead of the rest best in slot option despite being an Order character. This is actually because the set takes time to ramp up with a fairly mediocre passive. That said, this set has already been buffed and changed, where it formerly took at least 2 turns to even gain a 10% damage increase, but now the set starts at a 10% damage increase at 1 cast of an attack card, and has also increased its max damage ceiling with it scaling up to 20% as opposed to 15 in the past. Now despite these changes, we'll still have to wait and see if this improved value makes it easier for Yuki to play with it equipped, as this isn't just a matter of whether or not you can get more damage at a max ceiling, it also matters if the 10 or 10% is more reliable than just using a 2-2-2 setup, and we'll just have to wait and see for the future. For stats, Yuki prefers a simple and linear priority, and this is with crit rate being similar in value to crit damage, and following this attack percent being the last, fast but still relevant stat line for her. On her main stat slots, however, you generally want crit rate or crit damage for the 4th slot, order or attack percent on her 5th slot, and attack percent again on her 6th. For substats, stick to crit rate, crit damage, and attack percent with flat attack, and this makes sense as she is just a typical crit rate DPS. Yuki's best equipment setup is all about increasing her damage while supporting her constant card draw loop, and with this, Chimera Knight, Replica Core, and Dopamine Injector are all fantastic options for her depending on how you choose to play her. These weapons offer damage increases to either her specific cards, her turn, or something in between, and though which weapon you receive is RNG, there is still something to consider when it comes to this choice. Now, despite Chimera Knight seeming to be the obvious choice since it's a unique weapon and of course has the highest value, it does also mean that Yuki would be unable to use any other unique items in her build. Now, this might seem fine again as Chimera Knight's added damage is powerful, but because other weapons have additive or competitive scaling damage-wise, there actually exists a more relevant unique gear piece to consider for Yuki, and that's the Fragment of the Empty Void armor piece. To be clear, this is a unique armor piece that allows you to discard up to 3 cards at the start of battle, and these will then allow Yuki to remove any useless cards at the start of battle and then potentially draw a more useful card searching ability instead. Now, the obvious weakness of waiting for something like Fragment of the Void to drop is that you can't necessarily guarantee it every run, but as with the RNG of all Chaos Manifestation clears, I felt it important to mention as card drawing and hand manipulation does feel especially important for Yuki. Now, for non-unique armor, most legendary tier armor will work as there's a lot of RNG in the process, but as a result, pieces like Fairy King's Crown, Assault Boots, Reinforced Combat Suit, or even Brainwave Blocking Helmet will work as a placeholder. As for trinkets, you do have access to another unique trinket in the form of Revelations of Futility, and this reads that when using attack cards, you gain fixed shield, but again, depending on what you choose to prioritize, as this is more for survival, you do have access to other options like a Morpheus Cube, which delivers a solid damage increase, while alternatives like Quantum Collector or Eye of the Eyeless can work too, though this is again mostly dependent on your team, the fight, and what your goal is during the run. Overall, any trinkets that increase damage in this slot will be helpful, though it is also a decent idea to again take survival-based trinkets during the start of a Chaos run to then sometimes swap out later for a more DPS-oriented trinket instead. Now, surprisingly for partners, Lillian is actually one of Yuki's best in slot options thanks to how much draw support and extra AoE damage that she brings to Yuki's rotation, but despite losing damage through the lower base attack of the partner, the utility lines up perfectly with Yuki's card cycling playstyle, and it also acts as another opportunity for the team to AoE, which is typically what Yuki is built and used for. Her signature, West Makat, is still a great option for her, however, as the added damage from its passive and its ability to card draw is still useful in certain situations, but especially compared to the straightforward and easy value of drawing a card with Lillian and then AoEing, West Makat can sometimes feel less flexible or less impactful without pre-planning. Beyond these two options, using partners like Scarlet, Douglas, or any other option that you've already upgraded, like Haru's signature if you pulled for her, will also work in the meantime until you get West Makat or the previously mentioned Lillian. Now let's move to Yuki's ego. For her first ego, the 20% damage amount reduction effect of Iceberg Cleave will be removed, and for her E2, at the start of battle, the inspiration of your drawn cards will be activated at the beginning of each turn for 2 turns. For her fourth ego, you'll gain 1 Sword Dance each time this unit's card is drawn through an ability, and Sword Dance specifically will increase Yuki's attack card damage by 10% for 1 turn with a max of 2 stacks. Regarding her E6, the maximum stack count of Sword Dance will be increased by 1, and its damage increase effect will be changed to plus 15. Now overall, though decent, her first, fourth, and 6th ego are somewhat forgettable as they are simply added damage multipliers, but I actually wanted to fixate on her second ego as it helps with one of Yuki's greatest flaws, which is not being able to function properly when she's unlucky with deck draws. To be clear, this doesn't necessarily act as a massive DPS increase as it only affects her inspiration condition for 2 turns, but it does also allow Yuki's team to start stronger and with higher damage cards from turn 1, regardless of how lucky or unlucky you are. Now, as we move to teams, Yuki's most reliable team setup pairs her with Nia or Veronica, and the third slot on her team is flexible, though mostly dependent on the content that you use Yuki in. When attempting Chaos Manifestation runs, the addition of a shielder like Kalipe, Maribel, or even adding someone like Mika in place of Nia/Veronica may feel necessary as the enemies in Chaos runs can sometimes be more difficult and inevitably cause increased stress buildup, but when in farming stages or when played against content like the Basin, removing the need for sustain/survival characters can also be viable as well, and a separate approach of running a draw-based support like Nia alongside another amplifier/DPS in the form of Veronica can also be great too. Beyond these options, using characters like Ray for card damage buffing and Cassius for direct library searching will also work well too, but this is mostly dependent again on your account, what you have access to with the limited upgrade materials we currently have, and and what your overall account goals are. With this, combinations like Nia plus Veronica, Nia plus Cassius, or Veronica plus Ray significantly improve her card flow, inspiration uptime, and overall damage output, but otherwise using Nia Mika, Mika Calipe, Mika Maribel, or some variation of this to prevent early chaos manifestation failures will be equally as strong and preferred. Now let's move to her pros and cons. For her pros, she does deal strong AoE DPS across multiple enemies, and in addition to this, she does have built-in tools to draw her own cards. However, beyond this, she can also function well through having neutral cards like Aggressive Mutant or even Attack in place of her otherwise direct attack card searching abilities, depending on who you have on your team. Aside from all this, however, it is worth noting that the current basin is also strictly designed with her in mind and specifically buffs inspiration having DPS, of which she is pretty much the only one who can make use of said buff. But next we have to actually talk about the cons, as there are a few that are noteworthy. First and foremost, she definitely has difficulty proccing inspiration consistently in early chaos or zero system stages without her second ego, and in terms of her search card abilities, her primary search card lacks the move tag, which restricts her to only the attack cards preloaded in your deck each turn. Now another major con in addition to all this, however, is that she can still end up with unplayable or untriggerable inspiration cards in certain runs, which of course feels slow, bad, and will probably make you take more damage. But something that we formerly considered half of a pro is also half of a con, which is the fact that her performance in the current MOC or basin is heavily flawed due to the buff only affecting Yuki herself, and this seeming like something that may not end up transferring into the future, as this is an extremely unusual case where only one character gets affected by a buff. Ultimately though, I would say her greatest flaw is honestly the fact that she just doesn't do enough single target or overall damage in a game that does eventually require you to deal with high health single target bosses, regardless of the content that you're using her in. But that's everything that we have today and that you need to know about Yuki, from how her cards flow to her best builds, potentials, partners, and team setups. She's a unit that has clear pros and cons, though there are definite concerns for her future if AoE doesn't end up being necessary in some game mode for the future. But as always guys, if you found today's breakdown helpful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks again to cannaaaa for sponsoring today's video, but thanks again for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy, good night.